Hey there, Andy Ron here with Montana Land Source. It is October 10th, 2023, and this is the video summary of the weekly Montana Land Report. This week is an unbelievably low amount of volume in the market, only 10 property updates. I'm not sure there's been a week that low since we've been running these land reports, which has been years. So quite a low week, 10 property updates, 4 new listings, 1 price change, 2 pending sales, and 3 sales. That may partially be reflective of the holiday weekend this weekend. Also, hunting season can kind of play into it. A lot of brokers and whatnot are off hunting and that kind of thing. But nonetheless, just incredibly low volume. And it's just showing what we have seen all year, and going into the fall and the end of the year appears to be just a continuation of incredibly low inventory and low transaction rates in the Montana land market. One thing I want to talk about this week is landowner expectations of value, of land values. I had an interesting phone conversation with a gentleman who is selling his land, selling it by himself, for sale by owner. And it is not that uncommon at all in Montana for landowners to have pretty high expectations of what their land is worth. Part of that is we have a highly imperfect market, and that is to say that there's not a lot of price discovery. Montana is a non-disclosure state, so what has been paid for properties is not available anywhere. Real estate professionals, brokers, and appraisers like myself, of course, work hard to track that information and whatnot and use that information for our clients. But the average seller or buyer without help from a professional has very little access to price information. And the fact is, even professionals have limited access to information. Not every appraiser and broker can get every sale and that kind of stuff. So anyway, there's this overall environment of not a lot of price discovery. This gentleman, so it's not uncommon for landowners, to maybe be 2 or 3 or 4 times above market value. And in fact, I think that's one of the hardest jobs of brokers, is managing expectations of their sellers, having those conversations at the kitchen table on pricing properties. And brokers all have funny stories about, dealing with sellers and trying to get them realistic on pricing. This individual I'm talking about was not only 4 or 5 times out of the market, I would say more like 1,000 times out of the market. Just an unbelievable price on the land he's hoping to sell, and was pretty adamant about that pricing, pretty cocky and self-assured. So it was kind of an interesting experience, but not that unusual. Again, just a lot, very common to have unrealistic expectations of the value in the market, and it causes problems in the market. That's what causes a lot of properties to stay on the market. Even though we've burned through a lot of inventory with the incredibly hot market we experienced going into 2020, 2021, 2022, we burned through a lot of inventory. Inventory is roughly half of what it was prior to that time period. Nonetheless, there are properties that have been on the market since before that time. There's not that uncommon to have properties sit on the market for years and years. I think one distinction, and this is a conversation I have when I get calls from landowners asking about help with pricing, is whether a land seller is a true seller or a speculator. And by a speculator, I mean they have their own idea of value. They are not highly motivated. They're only motivated to sell at their perceived price. So they're not necessarily interested in taking cues from the market, that kind of thing. A true seller is motivated. A true seller is going to take a hard look at the market and adjust accordingly and, get their property sold and move on. Whereas a speculator is potentially going to hold out for years and years for their perceived price. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's a free country, but it does get frustrating and kind of laughable when speculators try to insist that they know market value and understand market value and whatnot. And there's just an awful lot of those out there. And again, brokers especially have a lot of experience with that, and it's one of the most difficult parts of their job. As an appraiser, I'm mostly interested in the actual market and the actual market data. And in fact, in this period right now, which I would consider something of a correction period after having such a hot market over the past couple of years, it's nice to see market forces kind of kick in. We went from what was truly a seller's market to, I'm not sure we would quite call it a buyer's market at this point, or not, but certainly it has cooled substantially. Volume is down substantially. Like I talk about every week, there's live market stats at mtlandsource.com that anybody can go and look at, and it shows that pretty clearly. The decrease in volume, the stability in pricing, meaning that prices have been stable and not changing, pretty much flatlined for about a year. So go check that out at mtlandsource.com. In other news, I mistakenly last week announced the monthly Farm and Ranch Brokers meeting was last week, but I had that wrong. It's actually this week. It's actually tomorrow, Thursday the 11th. And interesting content this week. I believe he's a consultant with the Wilks Brothers, and anyone local will recognize that name as one of maybe the largest private landowner in Montana. But this consultant is going to speak on carbon markets and carbon credits, which is always an interesting, kind of an emerging market trend in the Montana land market, in the land market, perhaps across the country. So that meeting takes place in Billings tomorrow at 8:30, but it also, there are satellite meetings happening in Bozeman and in Missoula, and can also be accessed via Zoom. So if you go to mtlandsource.com calendar, you can go to a link to the Montana Farm and Ranch Brokers and get information about that meeting. That's the report for this week. Thanks everybody for tuning in as always, and we will see you next week.